Are we expecting an agreement in principle this week? And what would that mean for an eventual final Nafta deal?
So I think there's a really good chance, if the U.S. trade representative is in the mode of compromise, as well as the Canadians, to get a deal in principle by Friday. Now, it seems really short, but you've got to remember, people have been working on this for years, their whole career. A lot of experts here. Both sides are very, very well versed in this. And so, yes, it seems like 2 days seems short. On the other hand, if there's compromise in the air, I think we can get a deal in principle. What that means, though, is there's a lot of blanks that will need to be filled in. This is a very complicated deal. It has 30 chapters, a lot of detail yet to be filled in, and they'll need to get that filled in very quickly if they're going to meet congressional deadlines.
Mr. Ambassador, in fact, as we were speaking, we are now hearing from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying that there is a possibility of a NAFTA deal by Friday, but that Canada will defend dairy supply management. What does that mean for the future of NAFTA? Because we have seen the president being very adamant on just relaxing Canada's dairy quotas and tariffs.
So dairy, it's interesting how this comes up to be such a big issue, so that everybody has perspective here. Dairy is less than 0.5% of the trade that we do with Canada, and the U.S. has a surplus in dairy with Canada. And while the president has pointed out that there are penalties of 270%, nobody actually pays those because we actually have quotas that get us into Canada, and the Canadians don't really sell much dairy at all to the United States. But the president has made this an issue, and the prime minister also has domestic issues of keeping supply management in place. But I think there's room here. There's room to give additional access to the United States without disbanding the whole thing. That being said, it's so small relative to the overall trade, I'd hate to see this be the issue that breaks down the agreement.
Even though it's small, just one more moment, then we'll move on. Has the Prime Minister already indicated some give in dealings with the EU and trade agreements? Is it possible just to increase those quotas some?
Yeah, I think so. They did the same in TPP as well. So they've shown some ability to give additional access to the market. I think another sticking point on this is ultra-filtered milk, or what they call diafiltered milk, which actually Senator Schumer and others have been very concerned with. So I think if that area is dealt with, I think we can tackle this issue.
So let's move on to something that might be a little bit tougher, and those these Article 19 dispute resolution panels, the dumping panels. That seems to be a red line for Prime Minister Trudeau at this point. It's not clear it was really addressed with Mexico in a way that Canada could accept. So where are we on that?
So just as a bit of history for everybody, back when the original NAFTA was put in place, that the Canadians wanted to make sure that there was an independent arbiter when there were trade disputes, when there were tariff disputes. And so that was set up in Chapter 19, as well as in other chapters within NAFTA. So this is really important to Canada because, we don't want to be in a position where the U.S. does something to Canada and Canada doesn't like it and the U.S. says, just sue me. So they don't want to be relying on just one courts versus another, as well as U.S. companies don't want to have to go to Mexico or Canada to do lawsuits in those countries. They like this independent arbitration. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out, but I'm sure there's a compromise in there if people are willing to do it. I think you can carve out industries, you can look at it in certain ways, but, to a certain degree, getting rid of it and completely, I think, will be a hard thing for Canada.
Mr. Ambassador, you talked about politics within Canada. The Prime Minister had enjoyed support when it came to negotiating on NAFTA against the U.S. Will he have a bit more challenging times coming up, as we're hearing from conservative leaders now criticizing the Prime Minister?
So the election season has begun in Canada. The Prime Minister has announced that he is running again, and it's pretty clear that the behaviors domestically are lining up for a campaign that will be next October in 2019. That being said, I think the Canadian population overall is highly supportive of the Prime Minister in the negotiations with NAFTA, because this is just too important economically across the board. Hard to believe too many people would attack the Prime Minister in the middle of these sensitive negotiations.
So finally, Mr. Investor, we have some sense from the United States point of view what President Trump feels he has to deliver for his political base. From Prime Minister Trudeau's point of view, is cars really critical? If he can agree to something that says, you know what, we've really done well on cars, we're going to be fine on cars, is that really going to be terribly important to the Canadian people?
Yeah, so $670 billion worth of bilateral trade. Again, the U.S. has a surplus with Canada. But from a Canadian perspective, if you take away energy and agriculture, the most important manufactured product is automobiles. And we make cars together. By the way, a car made in Canada, 50% of the content is U.S. content. So it's really, we make it together. But this is really important to the Canadians. And so I would say what the Mexicans have done already in negotiations, that falls right in line with where Canada is. I think Canada's running 71, 72% North American content anyway. So to get to 75 is not a heavy lift. And wages up there are much higher than Mexico. So again, I think the Mexican deal on auto is something that the Canadians can embrace.